Father Alexander Rentel is Chancellor of the USCA and has taught canon law at St. Vladimir's Orthodox Seminary for many years. Father Alexander is one of just a handful of Orthodox academics whose focus is on the canonical tradition of the Orthodox Church. I know there's a lot of interest in the canons in the canonical tradition, and so I was really glad for the opportunity to sit down with Father Alexander recently. So without further ado, I hope you'll enjoy this episode from my interview with Father Alexander Rentel.
Patriarch of Constantinople holds a very particular and unique position within the patriarch, within the canonical tradition, within the Orthodox world. And to understand this, you have to kind of understand some basics of the geography, the geographical presuppositions behind the canons, which were all imperial. It followed the imperial system. The church accommodated itself to the way the empire broke itself down. So within the canons, there are references to cities, and each of these cities perhaps had a bishop and in them. And this was a primary relationship between bishop and his city, the churches that were in this city. These cities were gathered up into what are called provinces, eparchies, and the bishops in these eparchies formed a synod, and these synods were then presided over the bishop who was in the principal city of these eparchies, the metropolitan city, or the metropolis, and they were the bishops of the metropolis, and that gave the name to this type of bishop, the metropolitan bishop. These provinces then, in the canonical tradition, were likewise gathered up into larger geographical structure called dioceses. And dioceses were not as we think of them today, but dioceses were vast geographical areas made up of a number of provinces, which were likewise made up of a number of cities. Yeah, within each of these dioceses, likewise, the bishops, presumably, of the provinces formed synods presided over by the bishop in the chief city of the diocese. So you have a Diocese of Oriens, Egypt, presided over the Bishop of Alexandria, the Diocese of Oriens, Antioch, Bishop of Antioch. Then, of course, you have Diocese of Asia, which is now very much part of Asia Minor, what is now Turkey, of southern Turkey, and then there's Pontus, which is what is now modern-day Turkey, and then Thrace, which is, of course, the European side, eastern Greece, eastern part of Bulgaria. These were large administrative units. There are other dioceses in the Roman Empire, of course. You had the Diocese of Dacia, the other Western dioceses, and they don't impact as much on the Byzantine canons. In each of these dioceses are their principal cities, and the bishops were in charge of them. In terms of the structure of the church, there's only one bishop who's actually given a supra, an above one diocese ministry, and that's the Patriarch of Constantinople. When the famous canon of the Council of Chalcedon, the Fourth Ecumenical Council, in the 28th canon, is given the right of ordination of the metropolitans of Diocese of Asia, Pontus, and Thrace, and also he has some authority over the bishops from these dioceses who work in the barbarians. The barbarians were so-called people who didn't fit into these geographical systems, so they might have been migrant groups who were moving through, and you had bishops who were doing ministry with them. The bishop in Constantinople could also have some degree of authority over them. Coupled with this canon of the Council Chalcedon, there were some earlier canons, 1 Constantinople 3, that says he is given the same primacy of honor that the Pope of Rome has after the Pope of Rome, giving him, in other words, a very exalted position within the church. Subsequent canons subsequent to these councils in Trullo label or organize the system of patriarchs that existed there: Rome, Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, and then Jerusalem, in that order, an order that is maintained more or less to this day, of course, with the exception of Rome. that order is maintained, or the order is seen among the patriarchates. Notably, the Church in Rome has a supra-diocesan prerogative in the canons, but also the Patriarchate of Constantinople has a supra-diocesan authority that the other bishops, Antioch, Alexandria, and Jerusalem, don't have in the canons. In the modern world, before skipping to the modern world, I should say, in the Byzantine era, of course, the Patriarchate of Constantinople assumed a greater and greater responsibility for the churches in the East, being the principal bishop within the territory of the empire, of course working together with the bishops in Antioch, Alexandria, and Jerusalem. Having said that, especially in various times, his influence has been greater, and his authority, especially within the Byzantine Empire, was second to none. In our own modern world, much of what the Patriarch of Constantinople does is based upon reflection of these earlier canons that do give him a very unique role within the church, a role that is not given to any other patriarchs. So he does have this supra-diocesan authority. He also has within his canonical rights the ability to hear appeals from other churches. Canons 9 and 17 the Council of Chalcedon accord him a right to hear appeals of other churches. They can bypass people seeking redress, can bypass their own sort of system and go directly to him. And using these canons and the reflection that goes into them, and also using an interpretation of the canons that is consistent. That is to say, we look at these canons and we seek to apply them in a manner, even when they don't touch directly on a subject, we can apply them in a manner that is analogous. Again, the Patriarch of Constantinople has a unique role within world orthodoxy to this day. Of course, there's a great controversy in our own day with regard to the possibility of granting groups in Ukraine autocephaly. It seems to be that perhaps canonically enshrined, the Patriarch of Constantinople, the Patriarchate has that authority according to the canons. I leave that aside, the particular issue aside. But according to the canonical tradition, above all, the maintenance of the communion between the Orthodox churches is a role that the Patriarchate of Constantinople, I would say, can be found very easily within the canonical tradition. To maintain the unity, communications to be a focal point of reference, but above all, service to the other churches in maintaining this communion. I think that that's easily found within the church. I don't know how hotly debated that is within the churches. I think rather the actual practice, the scope, how that's actually done might be a little bit more controversial. Certainly presiding over inter-Orthodox activities at the level of when the Patriarch himself is present, excuse me, such as the Council in Crete, is a practice that is enshrined very much in church history, well within the bounds of the canonical tradition. Not only then presiding at these councils, but working to make these councils happen, putting agendas, putting forward meetings, helping set up times and places when this activity, pre-conciliar or the actual conciliar activity, can take place. This is in many ways the role I think the Patriarch of Constantinople has canonically enshrined. I do note there's an unfortunate tendency to say any time that the Patriarch of Constantinople seems to move beyond his church, that he is exhibiting an error of papism or papacy. And I would say that I think within the canonical tradition there is very clearly enshrined a notion of universal primacy, a primacy primacy is a ministry that he exercises, the Ecumenical Patriarch, within the church. Again, where I think there is the dispute is more to the point about how this is actually exercised. some people might push back a little bit more if his activity is seen as exceeding the bounds of what truly universal primacy is, perceived interference in the life and the activities of a local church beyond receiving appeals, coordinating inter-Orthodox activities, presiding at liturgical celebrations at a pan-Orthodox level.
Hi again. Hope you enjoyed this episode from my interview with Father Alexander Rentel. Please subscribe to get notified when new videos become available. And if you enjoyed this episode, please consider becoming a patron of this channel. There's a link to the patronage page of our website below this video. Thanks so much for your support, and we'll see you soon. Patrick prophesied this day, he'd have helped you along your way. Unquenchable thirst till your death, you search the earth.